Hi guys, in this episode of Shri series, we're going to be talking about linear graphs, but a specific emphasis on parallel and perpendicular lines. All right. Now, if I look at this question here, the question's asking, determine if the following pair of graphs are parallel, perpendicular, or neither. All right, so we've got question A and question B, and these are the pair of graphs. All right, so these are the straight lines. Y equals -3/7x minus 1/2. Y is equal to 7/3x plus 2. And you look at B, y is equal to half x minus 6, and y is equal to half x minus 4. All right, so these are the pair of graphs, and a lot of times you'll be given questions where they'll give you two pair of graphs or line graphs, and they will tell you, or they will ask you, if the lines are parallel or perpendicular. All right, so in the previous video, I did give you guys a bit of a theory between the difference between parallel and perpendicular lines. All right, so I'll just write it here. In parallel lines, so if you got two lines that are parallel, you got to remember the gradients are the same. So in other words, you've got M1 equals M2. All right, so if you've got two lines, for instance, like that, and they are parallel, M1 and M2, and as you guys know, parallel lines don't meet, and if two lines have the gradient M1 and M2, if M1 is equal to M2, then it's parallel. All right, if we look at perpendicular, like I mentioned before, perpendicular means two lines meeting at 90 degrees. So suppose you've got one line here, another line here, that's a graph, and let's say that's M1 and M2, and if they are to be perpendicular, what that means is the product of their gradients M1 times M2 equals -1. So in other words, that times that should be equal to -1. So this is the theory. I'll just highlight it here for you guys so you can see where we're coming from, and we'll use this to help. This will be our benchmark. All right, so let's look at the two lines here. Let's look at A. Y is equal to -3/7x minus half, or 1/2, and y is equal to 7/3x plus 2. All right, now if you remember in the previous video that I put up there, every equation of a straight line needs to be written in the form y equals mx plus c. All right, so m is your gradient and c is your y-intercept. So what we need to do is, using y is equal to mx plus c, we need to determine the gradient of these two graphs. So if you look at the first one here, m is -3/7, and you look at the gradient of this graph here, so let's call that m1, and we'll call M2, which is for that curve there. All right, so that's for that graph there. All right, so M2 becomes 7/3. All right, so M1 is -3/7, and M2 is 7/3. All right, how do we get the gradient? That is the m in y is equal to mx plus c. So if you look at this graph, it's written in the form y is equal to mx plus c. Y is equal to mx plus c. All right, so the first question I'm going to ask you is m1 equal to m2? So in other words, are they equal? Certainly they're not, because you've got a negative value, and if that was negative, that should have also been negative. And also, if that was parallel, they were meant to be -3/7. They're meant to give you the same. So if you look at here, M1 is not equal to M2. All right, so therefore they're not parallel. All right, now let's see if they're perpendicular. All right, what is the test for lines to be perpendicular? When you get M1 and M2 and you multiply them together, and if the product is -1 as stated here, then the line is perpendicular. All right, so let's have a look at that. -3/7 multiplied by 7/3 And you're going to get negative 21 divided by 21, and your answer is negative 1. So that tells you that these two lines are perpendicular. All right. So in other words, y is equal to negative 3 over 7x minus half and y is equal to 7 over 3x plus 2 are perpendicular, because when you look at their gradients and you multiply them, the product is negative 1. All right. Now, let's look at b. Y is equal to half x minus 6 and y is equal to half x minus 4. Now, this looks pretty easy because if you see here, my m1 is 1 over 2. And my m2 here is 1 over 2 again. So if you look at that, when the gradients are equal, if m1 is equal to m2, that means these two lines are parallel. So if you see here, m1 equals m2, and therefore these two lines are parallel. All right. So just in summary, when you want to test or find out which of the pairs are parallel or perpendicular, the first thing you need to do is make sure that the graph is written in the form y is equal to mx plus c. All right. So in these two questions, we're lucky because they're all written in that form of y is equal to mx plus c. You find the gradient of the two pairs, and if they're equal, then they are parallel. So if you look at this question here, m1 is half and m2 is half, and they're both equal, therefore they are parallel. But if you look at this question here, m1 is negative 3 over 7 and m2 is 7 over 3. They're definitely not parallel, they're perpendicular, because when you multiply them together, you are going to get negative 1 as your product. All right. In the next video, we're going to do slightly different questions where the lines or the equations are not in this form. We need to put it in that form and then decide whether they are parallel and perpendicular. All right. Parallel or perpendicular. Thanks guys for listening. Bye now.